Okay, welcome everybody. We are here with our special school pro guest, Adam Russo. And Adam, where are you joining us from today?
Naperville, Illinois, just outside of Chicago.
Illinois. And we've had a chance to
Yeah.
talk a little bit about some hockey. You can see a hockey picture in his background. We shared some sorrow stories over some losing teams lately, but we're hoping for a better, brighter future, right?
Definitely,
Talking
definitely.
about uh, talking about resilience today, which is perfect because I think we both need our hockey teams to have a little bit more resilience going forward. Um, Adam, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your quick story of who you are and what you have to offer?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. So I am a social worker by training. I've been a social worker for 20 plus years, and so when I graduated school, went to work in high-end residential treatment. So kids who had failed out of the foster care system, group homes, they really the end of the line because their behaviors were just so extreme they couldn't function in a community-based setting. So started off as a therapist there. Working with kids with special needs, intellectual deficiencies, autism, trauma. I mean, you name it, kids kids had it. It was a pretty intense place, and I was there for a number of years. And as a therapist, I was able to be very successful. Redoing milieu programming, and making it so that the number of physical incidents that would occur on the units was decreasing quite a bit. Kids were getting better; they were discharging. We were able to expand the unit's number of residents because we got to really be a safe place, and so did that for a couple of years and then started moving up organizationally, ultimately up to a program coordinator and then overseeing all the special needs programs. So about, 40 beds, 75 staff there. And then during that time, because the clinical treatment was just so intense, I wanted to just kind of work with, I guess kind of, I'll lack of a better word, normal population, right? I just wanted to work with just some kind of, depression, anxiety of just what was happening for day to
Hmm.
day for people who were functional, given the intensity levels of where the kids were. And I really enjoyed it. And I just wanted to see people, a handful of people a week. But it just kind of kept growing. The referrals kept growing, and I started working. Next thing I knew, I was working probably 70 hours a week, seeing my full time job on top of seeing 25 people a week or so on a private basis. And I was like, I got to make a decision here about what I want to do. So moved into my practice full time and just kept growing it. And so worked a lot with a business coach, because I am not, was not trained in business, but I know I needed to learn more about it. So work with a business coach and really work to really, purposefully grow the practice. And over the course of, the next 12 years or so, we grew to about 140 plus employees, 80 providers. We had four child psychiatrists, seven total doctors, then another four or five nurse practitioners, clinical psychologists, did a lot of psych testing, really believe in psych testing, and then social workers and therapists. And so we grew to a large size, and I eventually sold the practice in 2020. Just because in healthcare, it kind of ran out of financial runway is probably the best way to put it. And so
Hmm.
it was time. It was time to make that decision. And so I decided to sell. And then I moved into the company that bought us was private at the time. Did outpatient behavioral health. It was great. I became a regional VP. Um, Oversaw about 1,000 providers in four states,
Wow.
and then they went public, which was interesting kind of transition. So during that time, did about a dozen acquisitions of private practices, the diligence behind it. It was really interesting. But I really wanted to get back to the root of working with individuals, and that's why I wanted to get into business coaching and leadership development. It's something that I've always been passionate about as far as the teams that I would work with. I think my business was so successful because we invested so much over the years in leadership development of our
Hmm.
of our teams, top to bottom, and something I really believe in. And so, working with leaders and business owners now of all right, how do we help with your communication strategy, goal planning, time management, leadership abilities, and really trying to work with people so that they can improve their organizations.
That's an incredible work history, and uh, that success doesn't come without a lot of hard work. And you can see that you're really invested in people and your organization. You did a TEDx talk.
I did,
Yeah,
yeah,
can you give us
I
just
did.
a brief overview of what you talked about?
Yeah, so the talk was that we must keep, it was titled "We Must Teach Kids to Fail," and it stemmed out of back in, I think I did my TED Talk in 2017 or something like that. So let's say in 2015, I had a local junior high school come to me and they said, we want you to give a talk to our local parents about how to help kids cope with anxiety. And they were giving me like an hour and a half, and I didn't want to spend the whole time talking about how kids should, count to 10, take deep breaths, and walk around the block.
Right.
Really wanted to give something of, use, and a big part of it, the more I thought about it and I was reading about, was, kids don't want to fail. There's a real drive for perfectionism,
Yes.
and that really started getting me down, the line of, what the impact of the importance of failure is on young people, and how as a culture we don't support that. And I think, and that's why I really want to talk about it, and it turned into a TEDx talk and eventually my book. But the idea was, how do we talk about failure in a way that's positive and proactive with kids? And I think especially in education, because that's what I talk about, helping kids learn how to fail, because education, I think, values accuracy, precision,
Hmm.
moving slowly, right? And ironically, they're all the things that don't correlate to high performing leaders in the future. So there's a real dichotomy that exists there, and that's why I thought, bringing attention to those issues, I think, was important.
Oh, and it's about the word we're going to talk about today, which is resiliency, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
we want resilient kids because resilient kids grow up to be resilient adults, and those that are not afraid to face failure. It's
exactly.
the cliche is ready, fire, aim. Have you heard that one before? I'm sure you have.
I have. Yeah,
Um,
I have.
yeah, we I think we have a lot of adults and a lot of kids that are afraid to take that first shot because they're afraid they're going to miss. And um, you're right in that successful people are not afraid of failure. They will go after it, and if it fails, they get back up again and they do it again.
Yeah,
Um,
and they view failing as learning, as part of a process, and I think that's what's, to me, always been. And Angela Duckworth wrote all about it in Grit. The idea of growth versus fixed mindset, and I use failure as a kind of as a tongue-in-cheek expression, in that, it's not failure. It's just everything is part of a process, and I
mhm,
think if we look at things in kind of a format of beginning and end,
mhm,
then yeah, then at the end is either success or failure. If you view it through the lens of a constant ongoing process, then you're just learning. And so there isn't ever really a failure. It's just a matter of at what pace and how exactly are you going through the process,
mhm.
and to eventually get to where you want to go. And it might include, more downward steps, but at the same time, it doesn't mean that you don't eventually achieve what you want to.
You mentioned your book. You better get a plug in for this book.
Okay, yeah. So
Yeah.
so after my TED Talk, yeah, at the end of after my TED Talk, a lot of people told me, you got to write a book about this too. And so I wrote a book called Unwritten Rules: Real Strategies to Parent Your Child to Successful Adults, available on Amazon. And the reason why I wrote it was, just like, and it was very similar to me, as much as, I was involved in my own organization, as much as, you're an organizational leader, and you have a strategy. You have a strategy about what you're trying to do with your organization, with your people, with your process. It's the same thing as a parent. If you don't have a strategy as a parent, what exactly are you doing? And so I thought it would be really helpful to write a book that was really geared toward kind of, just an easy read, using kind of short stories to kind of
Mhm,
illustrate examples, and then lessons afterwards, with the idea being of, let's take common day-to-day things that happened in households, and how can a parenting strategy really make an impact on a kid, because everything that happens every day is an opportunity for a parent to implement the strategy. And I don't think a lot of parents recognize that it's the sum of all the little things
mhm,
that really create their kids. It's not how they handle those really big events. I mean, those matter, but those big events are only going to be handled the way, in a similar fashion, that the small ones are.
mhm,
So as parents, it's really important to have a strategy. And I highlight at the end, the idea to me was, because as a parent, you want your kids to grow up to be a certain way, to be successful as adults. And so I tried to highlight two stories of adults who kind of, one, who was able to kind of understand the nuance, and one
mhm.
who wasn't. And it's not that one is any more successful than the other per se, but I think what I wanted to try to highlight was that idea of, if kids are able to really be able to internalize these traits, that they can be able to kind of continue through a process of learning and continue to grow in their careers personally and professionally, rather than hit a wall. And I think
Hmm.
that's, to me, that's the big determinant.
Yeah, we want kids to grow up and be successful, right? And I noticed
Yeah, absolutely.
you said parenting strategy, not my best friend making strategy, right? Those are two
Yeah,
different things.
exactly. Two
Yeah.
different things.
Yeah,
Two
it doesn't
different
mean you're
things.
gonna make friends with your kids when you're helping them through these pieces, but that's not our job.
No, and it doesn't mean
Um,
you can't be friendly, but you have to know what you're
right.
doing.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just a few more questions. We're talking about resilience. How do you define resilience in that context of education, and for our students? You
Yeah.
touched
So
on
in
it a little
education,
bit.
yeah, I think, and in education, I think it's, first of all, I think that, understanding the mindset that, I'm a really big believer in treating kids as individuals, right? They're, so to say that, a whole class has to be in a certain place or whatever the case is, I think it's first really important to look through the lens of an individual, because I think every kid is going to have a different level of tolerance, a different ability to achieve. And I think so first and foremost, we have to understand what's a fair expectation for each and every kid as an individual. Then I think the next part is, well, if kids are going to be resilient through education, how do we help them really kind of understand that things are just hard, right? And like, some examples are, I've talked to teachers who have said, well, what do I do with kids who are, so smart? They can't really fail. And I talked to some teachers, and what the idea I gave them to do, and they said it was working really well, is they would work with a group with a lot of these, really bright kids. Once or twice a week, they would present them with like these almost unsolvable riddles, just to give them the experience of working really hard and failing, just
Mm-hmm.
so that they understand what it feels like.
Mm-hmm.
Because and I think that, and I think that's a really, so the on one hand, it's about, all right, so most kids are going to naturally struggle though in school. I think then the big part is, what's the setup for them to still be successful? And I think sometimes in education, we've gotten that, I don't know, I think we've messed that up a little bit. And what I mean by that is, like I have, the whole kind of, I don't know, at least where I am, there's a lot of retaking of tests if
Mm-hmm.
if you get below a certain grade, things like that. Like, sometimes you just mess up, right? And we have to live with the consequences of how things go, right? I mean, maybe you studied really hard, maybe it didn't go well, maybe you
Mm-hmm.
didn't study, right? Whatever the case is, but you messed up, right? So the question to me really in education is, how then are we setting up that process for that kid to move forward, right? So let's say they do really poorly on one test at the beginning of a semester, and then they do really well the rest of the semester. What opportunities as a teacher or as an educational system are we to say, what, maybe this kid is, we can provide some different opportunities for them to take advantage of, so we can mitigate the negative effect of that first grade. Whereas,
Mm-hmm.
like, and I think and so that's where, as a system, I think we have to be able to support the resilience of kids, while at the same time not just holding them hostage to one, bad outcome, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I think that's kind of the idea of how do we balance that? And I think there's a lot of different ways to do it.
Oh, that's really great insight. I love that idea of finding a way, and it sounds mean, doesn't it? But finding a way to have kids fail so they can experience that. Because maybe it's an
Yeah, it's that.
academic fail, or maybe we've seen kids before that are gifted academically, but socially have trouble. So that's another area of you know trying kids and having them get out there and be vulnerable.
It is, and I mean, even the social context, and it happens with young kids too. You have kids who aren't getting along, and they're in elementary school. At what point, or again, I've heard it from too many schools, and I'm sure it's common where you are too. Why are we having parents drive the resolution for these kids?
Hmm.
At what point are we helping the kids resolve this themselves? And the issue is that it might be messy, and it might not go well, and it might take a lot more time than if the adults
Hmm.
got involved. But we had a saying working in residential treatment, because so many issues that were happening between the kids, a lot of them were created because of the way the adults would intervene. And we had a saying that went around, is we should get rid of the adults because the kids can take care of themselves.
Right.
And to some extent, it was true. Not that they don't need guidance, but as adults, we tend to almost make some things worse.
Mhm.
And with instead of empowering the kids and coaching the kids through how to handle some situations so that they can turn around and then manage those situations accordingly. And again, it might be messy, but that's how they learn. They need to make the mess in order to learn how to best kind of do it another time.
Right. If they're going to rewrite the algorithm to have a better outcome in the end, they have to write it.
Exactly.
And adults can't keep giving them the formula because it's not going to make sense to them. So let them struggle through, figure out the new algorithm so they have a different outcome.
Exactly.
Adam, we're going to end with just kind of a fun one. But before we do that, do you have any call to action to our educators out there?
Yeah, I mean, what I would say is, resilience in schools. I think it's I've worked with boards of education in some different schools, and one of the things that's really come up constantly has been kind of what the mission of a school is, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think schools are really I think they're having a wrestling match between, do they need to work to make sure their kids look good on paper, or are they developing kids who are really going to be, successful as adults? And I think and I do think that there's a split in that because oftentimes if you're going to work for kids to be successful as adults, they're going to go through these windows where they're not going to look good on paper.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think for schools to really understand their mission and how resilience fits into it, I think is incredibly important. And I think even if schools need help clarifying that, that's where I come in and helpful to be able to really kind of weigh out how can we make resilience an important part of a school culture while at the same time accomplishing the goals that schools have.
That's great. Thank you so much, Adam. Last question. What's the funniest thing that has ever happened to you in working with a kid?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I think about those. Some of them aren't. So there's been a handful of things, and so I think one of the funniest things, and I don't know how appropriate this is, but it was really funny at the time because, so I worked as part of when I've been very active in the community, and one of the things that I was involved in was our school district has a business incubator program for high school seniors, and so the idea is it's a full year long class. They start it from beginning to end, and start a business. At the beginning of the year, they go through, pricing and really try to get to prototypes. And the idea is ultimately they do a pitch, like a Shark Tank style pitch at the end to investors, and they try to get funding. And some of these businesses have gone on for a couple of years, since then. And I was working with this group of high school seniors, all boys, and one of them was making they were calling, trying to get manufacturing information. And it was just funny because what they were trying to manufacture, something out of rubber, and it turned into a very kind of off-color conversation while he was on the phone. The kids were just cracking up, and the kid on the phone was cracking up, and I'm there trying to be this mentor, but it was retroactively funny. So like I said, it was maybe not the most appropriate scene, but it was funny because ultimately, because I had a good relationship with these kids and I really helped them along the way. And they still stay in touch with them. They're connected with me on LinkedIn. A lot of them are in college now, and, letting me know how they're doing and what they're up to and things like that. So it's, that was always fun being a part of those groups and watching those kids grow and develop as, in their educational setting.
Well, we never know when humor is going to present itself, right? So
exactly.
Part of being resilient is recovering from humorous points in our lives and knowing how to respond. So, Adam, thank you so much for joining us today. And Adam is available, and we would love to connect you out into some Minnesota schools and get your work here. If you need anything, please contact me, and we'll get you connected with Adam. Thank you, Adam.
Thanks for having me.
All right.